We are going to look at a passage in Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah was a prophet 700 years before Jesus that talked a lot about the future and what the world is going to look like. Now, my first point is I refuse to accept that the world must always remain broken and unjust. There's just something in our nature, our human nature, that doesn't like to see injustice, that doesn't like to see suffering, doesn't like to see hunger. There's something wells up inside of us. And a lot of people around us will say, there's nothing you can do. There's always going to be poor people. There's always going to be oppressors. There's always going to be the victims of that. But there's just something, I believe, in so many of us that just says, no, at some point, things have to change. It doesn't have to be this horrible way. Things can get better. And that's where Isaiah comes in. Isaiah comes in acknowledging that these are very perilous times. And he's talking about 700 years before Jesus, so about 2,700 years ago. So even Isaiah was saying there's going to be a day when a leader will emerge, a new king will come about, and things will change. And as the people listened to Isaiah, they doubted his words. Just like today, we think, well, could somebody really come and save the day? Whenever the population is unsettled and a lot of unrest, everybody's looking for the leader to come and save the day. We even have a phrase for it. We call that the Messiah complex. The Messiah complex is when somebody shows up and they act like they're going to fix everything, and they're the center of all the solutions. Politics is a hotbed for the Messiah complex. Whenever people are struggling, whenever people are in trouble, it's not hard for somebody to emerge and say, hey, I'm the new Messiah. I'm the one who's here to solve all your problems. Just vote for me and everything's going to be great. We always tend to think that this is a recent phenomenon, but even in our young country, this is something that's been a part of politics from the beginning. One of my favorite politicians in American history is a guy named Huey Long. Huey Long was born, as so many, very, very poor in desperate times, but there was just a fire that burned inside of him. And he, against all odds, found his way to law school, graduated, and as he's walking away with his new certificate to be a lawyer, to go take the bar, he's thinking, I'm going to go straight into politics. I'm going to be elected. And his goal was to be elected governor of Louisiana. Now, Louisiana, of all the 50 states, is probably the most corrupt state in America. And it's been that way ever since the French people were there. So that's why it is the way it is. I'm just joking. I don't really believe that. Well, anyways, so he's in this impossible state where the governors are just kind of picked by the aristocrats. And so here comes Huey Long, and he says, I'm going to beat the system with hard work. And he gets in his little jalopy, and he starts driving all the way through Louisiana, all the back roads. And remember, this is 100 years ago. So at this point, there's not a whole lot of paved roads, and there's a lot of back roads. And he drove 15,000 miles during his campaign. He would go into these little teeny towns that might be maybe a dozen residents. And he was sometimes the first politician any of these people had ever seen. Weren't they lucky to finally see a politician? But he wouldn't go alone. He would bring a band with him, a big brass band, about a dozen people playing tubas and trumpets and what have you. And so he would send them out to, whatever little meeting place they had. And they would start up the band and make a lot of music and a lot of noise, and the people would come. And then out comes Huey Long, and he would be in a satin white, linen white suit. And so he commanded a lot of attention, and then he would begin his little political thing. And his whole thing was, every man a king. And the idea was, I'm going to distribute the wealth so well that every household is going to live like they were royalty, like they're a king. You're going to have money. You're not going to have to pay property taxes. You're going to be able to have a free house. You're going to have a car. You're going to have appliances. You're going to have food. You're going to be living like a king. Oh, people love to hear that. They thought that was the greatest news they'd ever heard. And my gosh, that guy just caught fire. And he he went through that whole state, and he was elected governor of the state of Louisiana by the widest margin that had ever been before, and nobody's ever come closer to beating Huey Long's margin of victory to be governor. He did that, and people would say, well, how are you going to do this? Well, he had another campaign slogan, and this one was, share our wealth. And what he was saying was, the reason you guys don't have money, it's not because our government, we don't have money in this place, it's because we have different people, a few people who are hogging all of our resources. And what they need to do, they need to share our wealth with us. We need what we have come due to us. And so Huey Long started this thing, and people would say, well, I don't know where this money's going to come from. And he would say, you have no idea how rich the politicians are. We have so many corrupt politicians in Louisiana. He wasn't wrong. You have no idea how many corrupt politicians we have, and we're going to keep them from stealing. And then we have business interests that are just ripping the people off. They take all the money and then they pay you pennies. And we're going to reverse that. We're going to make sure they're paying the people. And then we're going to find all the rich people, and then we're going to tax them. And by the time we get all this money from these rich people, everybody's going to live like a king. And wow, people love that, and he did really well. He ruled Louisiana like a fascist dictator. And he's just telling everybody how things are going to be, and he's making these things happen, he's making that things happen. Well, what happens when you do that? Well, everybody wants you to keep going. And so he had political aspirations. So he ran for the Senate, and again, by the largest margin ever, and since he won his seat in the Senate, and he went to Washington, D.C., and did some more of his every man a king and share our wealth, and things are going so great, and comes back getting ready to run for president. Well, when you promise to give some people's money to everybody else, the people on the receiving end think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. They think you're just absolutely wonderful. But the people who are having to give the money to give away, they don't think you're so hot. And what happens is, it turns out the rich didn't have as much money as everybody said they had. And so the amount of money it takes to become rich it gets less and less and less and less and less. And so as it comes down, you start making more enemies. And unfortunately, at the age of 42, he was shot there in the state capital of Louisiana. If you ever go to Louisiana, you can take a look at the state capitol. It's not hard to It'd be easy to see because it's 34 stories high. Huey Long built it. And Dewey, his little brother, and he built this monstrous thing, and his statues till today. In fact, every time the Louisiana State University, LSU, goes out to play football, they play a song called Touchdown for Louisiana, and it was written by Huey Long. And so you can still see that. He still has a mesmerizing thing. But looking back over his political life, what happens? Yeah, did he do a lot of good, a lot of interesting things? Did he help? Yeah, he sure did. But boy, for every one thing he did that was above board, there was a lot of things he did below board. And it turns out that he wasn't a messiah. He really was a typical politician. And for every penny that he gave somebody else, he made sure he took two for himself. And it turned out to be kind of a sad story in the end. But isn't that the story every time? Isn't that just the story the way it is? People are human. Politicians are human. People that say that they're going to take care of everything are not the people who take care of everything. Sometimes they bring us even down a little bit. Even our today, with what Isaiah was saying was going to be the world, he painted a beautiful picture of the world, beautiful picture of the future. It's been 2,700 years since he's done that. And we have made just very incremental progress in becoming a better world. You think today, where do we have wars? Where the top wars right now that us living in America are most aware of would be the war in Sudan, the war in Myanmar, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza. And that's just the ones that are just at the top of the list, and just so many more wars. And just plaguing and just killing innocent people. Or then, you look through the way that there's terrorists everywhere, and so much terrorism going on in all the countries. And then you think about all of the hate crimes that exist and the racism that exists. I mean, that's just a plague that stalks the whole earth. And then, we come into, in our own days, in our own situations where all of us are affected. by the greed that is around us. And we're affected by the addictions that families have and the things that people make everybody suffer for. And then the theft. And that's just, even here in Evergreen, our thieves are learning that, we're not as careful as other parts. And so they're even coming in our own neighborhood near our own church to steal more things. And it's just not a great thing. And so poverty is still always an issue, and mental illness is still very much of an issue. And we look at all that and we think, well, boy, it seems like over time we should have been able to figure out some of these things. But we just can't. We just don't seem to, everything that we seem to do is a diminishing return to what was promised in that. And that's where Isaiah comes and speaks to you and to me. And Isaiah reminds us that God is very aware of us, and that God has his promise that he made. And at the core of his promise, the very center of his promise, is this promise to return. And when he returns, to set up a very much a political kingdom, but a kingdom where there is true righteousness and justice, the things that we all long for. And so we're going to read this passage here, and he's going to talk about that. He's going to talk about some of these ideas, and some of the ideas we would all really agree with. And then he talks about how there's going to be a new order to humanity and to nature and creation, and what God's going to do. So this here lays out the plan for what we are waiting for Christ to return for, and what we want to see Christ do. So let's read through this together. It's in Isaiah chapter 11. And I'll read the first verse, and you guys read the second verse, and we'll make it through. And so again, the first thing we're going to see here is that the Lord gives him a vision of a tree stump. A tree stump is when you have a tree and you cut it down, and you got that little bottom part of the tree, and then everything else under the dirt is there. He looked at that and he said, "Oh, okay, I see what that is." He called it the stump of Jesse. And Jesse was King David's father. And God had made some promises regarding David, and we'll talk about that. But that's the first thing he says, and the first thing he sees is life coming out of that dead stump. And so let's begin here. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This is about King Jesus. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious, and that will be heaven. I love watching soccer, and I don't get to watch all the games I want to watch because when they play. And so I don't tape it, right? I don't know what you do in this digital age, but you save the game, and I get to watch it later. Sometimes, because I have lots of news sources, they tell me who won the game. And that used to make me upset. I used to not like that because now I'm thinking, now I got to watch the game, but I already know who won. Now, most soccer games, you just kind of figure out who's going to win. It doesn't take very long. And you can kind of see the nature of the game. But every once in a while, there is a game that is very exciting and you don't know who's going to win. And if you don't know who won, you're just biting your nails and your blood pressure is going through the roof. I have found it medically and being much healthier for me to know in the beginning who's going to win, who's going to lose. It's much easier. I enjoy that game much more. But I love seeing how they do it. Because sometimes when my team might be down a goal or two and we're getting closer to the end, I'm like, how is this ever going to happen? I don't see this. But I know my team won. And so now I'm watching to see how did they pull this off. Is it going to be now? No, it wasn't now. Is it going to be now? No, it wasn't now. Okay, no, that whole play just failed. Is it going to be? And then out of the blue, a goal is made, and oh, that's how they made the goal. Oh, I see that. And so I get a lot of joy even watching those close games, knowing who won. In fact, there's a little part of me that kind of prefers it because I don't really do well when I don't know who's going to win, and it's just very frustrating. But when I know, I can just be at peace. That's very much how it is, knowing that Christ is going to return and establish his reign on earth. We know what the ending is. Do we know how it all plays out? No, we don't. We have little pictures here and there, but we really don't know. But with Isaiah, he talked about King David. And he gave us a hint of what's going to happen through the descendants of David. Now, the Jews, the Israelites, they believed that King David had an eternal reign, and his descendants would be on the throne forever. And that's the way it was supposed to be, but there was a condition to that. And that condition was, as long as I am your God and you are my people, I will bless you and give you land. But should the day come where I am no longer your God, you've turned away from me, and you are no longer my people, then you will lose your land. And the people loved having the land, but they weren't all that excited about having God, because God had expectations. And so they kind of played that little game, and over time, they began to lose the land. And they came to a moment where it looked like they were going to lose it all. And this is during Isaiah's lifetime. And Isaiah is saying, this is not good. You guys you've turned away from God. You're not living the way God wants you to live. And the consequences are coming. And during that time, while during Isaiah's time, God did this amazing thing and survived, that little Jerusalem survived. But 150 years later, sure enough, in came the Babylonians and decimated the place, and to a point where nobody even really knows who's a descendant of David anymore. They kind of kept track of it for the most part, but not like a hereditary kind of thing. Like by the time Jesus came, they didn't know who it was that would be on the throne, but they kind of knew what tribe or what lineage people had. They knew Joseph had a direct lineage to David. They knew that he was in that space. And so when Joseph went to Bethlehem and where Jesus was born, that was a sign to all that, yep, this person, this little baby that's being born is a king. This is the one. And so in the midst of that, we come back and we begin to see what the plans are for that king and how he lived his life and how he first died so that we could have our lives corrected with God, that we would have a relationship with God because Jesus paid the price of our sins, and now we can have a relationship with God. And so as we begin to see that, we begin to see this king and his kingdom take place as it begins to unfold here in the future. And so while this kingdom of David kind of took a hiatus to it, God had a continual line, a continual plan through this. And we see with Isaiah, as he begins talking about the future, Remember, he's talking 2,700 years ago. He talks all the way up very quickly, all the way through those centuries and centuries and centuries until Jesus is born. And then he begins talking again to us through centuries and centuries and a millennium, and then centuries and centuries, and now 2 millennium. And it just continues still going through time, and it won't slow down until the day comes when he does return. And when he does return, what we know is these little Polaroids that Isaiah shows us of what the kingdom is going to look like. Some of those are what we read today. These are things you can expect. But what you do know is that King Jesus is going to return, and things change. Things matter when he does. And when we look back at that stump, we see a stump, and we know the same things that Isaiah knew about that stump. That what you see on the surface is not everything that's happening. That there's something going on underground. There's something going on with things you cannot see. Today, we live in a time where lots of people are crying out to God. Does God care about me? Does God know me? Does God have a rescue plan for me? Does God have a plan B for the way my life is gone? Does God know what could happen to my life? Does he have a better plan for me? And just as God remembered the kingdom of David, and just as he remembered the Israelites, so God continues to remember each and every one of us. And he looks at us and he says, what you see on the surface might be a stump, but what I am doing underground, in that darkness, in that silence, is I am recreating life. I am causing life to rise again. And there on that dead stump, a little bit of green starts to appear. A little leaf starts to be there, which is a sign that that stump is not dead, that there is still life, and that a tree will exist in that place again. That's the same word that God gives to every single person today who thinks that their life is over, who thinks that God can't do anything else, who thinks that they've made so many mistakes that they can't come back anymore. Oh no. God sees you, and maybe other people see you, and everybody else says, oh no, I'm going to leave them for dead. There's nothing else that we can be done. But God says, oh no, what people don't see, that's where I'm at work. I still have life. I still have a plan. I still have a future for this person. I still have hope for this person. And that's what every Christian who comes to know Jesus begins to hear from God, and that God has not abandoned them, that God has not left them out in the cold, but that God is including them in the great things that he is doing. That God comes in and makes that difference in our lives. And just as the shepherds and the magi came to see the baby Jesus, they wanted to see Jesus. They were excited to see Jesus. But at the same time, you've got Herod and you've got his advisors who could care less about Jesus. In the same way, here we come to Christmas time. There's some people that are excited about the birth of Jesus. There's other people that shrug it off and could care less about the birth of Jesus. Regardless, all of us need to know who that king is, because that king lives today, and that king is going to return and establish his reign on earth. And knowing that, knowing how the end game happens, and knowing what the future is, helps you and me to understand the way God is working in this world. There's a lot of work being done underground. There's a lot of work being done outside of our view. But God is at work in every single person who will turn to him, who will open up their life to him, and they will soon begin to see the life of God and the salvation of God working through their lives, bringing up a shoot, bringing up a new leaf, bringing up something green. And that person, the person who knows Jesus, who knows God, can begin to say, I see God doing something. I don't know what it is, but I do feel his life coursing through my bones. I do feel his presence in my life. I do see his guidance, and I do hear his promises in my life. And so we begin to see that, begin to enjoy that, begin to know. Where is it that you and I can look in this world and not see any life, where there isn't anything? Well, geologically wise, you can go to places on this earth where there's just going to be no life, you would think. I read about one place. It's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and there's an underground thermal vent, so to speak, that comes up out of the ocean and up into the ocean. And the water in this location is 752 degrees. so far beyond boiling point, so hot. And in that temperature and in that pressure at the bottom of the sea, there are what they call tube worms and there are clams. And we look at that and we say, how can you live in this situation? A few years ago in Romania, just not too long ago, they discovered a cave, an opening under the earth, and not that far under the earth. And they came to it by accident, and there it was, and they realized that they had stumbled into an entire ecosystem that had formed for 5.5 million years. 5.5 million years by itself, nothing had ever seen daylight. There had been no light. There had been no oxygen coming from the top to the bottom. Complete isolation. And they found an entire ecosystem in there made up of spiders, made up of centipedes, and made up of leeches, and made up all kinds of things. And I think there's 43 variety of spiders. Not a single one has an eyeball. That might be less scary for some of you. But this entire thing where how on earth can anything exist? There's life. And we begin to see that when it comes to God, there's always, always life. That you cannot say that these circumstances would be too much in order for there to somebody to spring up in, or it's too serious for anything for God to ever bring his peace about, his sense of justice in. No, that's not the case, no matter who it is. And regardless of what the addictions are, or what the sin is, or regardless of how damaging people have found their lives and what they've done to family members perhaps, and how things have all worked out, regardless of all that, there is still life. There is still hope. So many of us look to the past like we're tied to it or something. Like the past is what determines our future. If you don't know Christ, maybe that is exactly what it is. Maybe you are tied to the past. But when you know God, when you come to know Jesus, the past does not matter anymore. The past is the past. You are a new creation. You are a new person. Now you have a new direction in your life. Christians are always future-oriented. So many people say, well, yeah, but what about this that happened 1,000 years ago? Or what about that? Who cares about that? It's today. We are living in today. And we are tied, we are drawn to the future. And what we as Christians are to do, we are to live as much as possible in that future. We're to understand what that future looks like for us today. So even though we don't have this political revolution that is to come when King Jesus returns to earth, yet there are still principles of how we live in the kingdom that you and I can adopt. And the core central theme to that is that we would live a life of love towards everyone. That we would be the people that bring peace in difficult situations. That we would be the people that bring justice in the situations as far as our influence can reach. But insofar as it belongs to us, we are the people that make these changes in this world. And this is what God has laid it on our hearts. It's not just that we live here and that we have this religion. No, at all, nothing like that. What we do is we live here and we have the Spirit of God living and changing us, transforming us from the inside. And as we follow his guidance and as we follow his lead and as we open up our eyes to God's word and listen to God speak to us, we begin to see a transformation that is impossible for any of us to imagine, that any of us would ever think we were capable of. But by God's Spirit and by God's power and by God's life, we begin to see those changes happening. And it's not just what we are becoming, but it's also what we are creating, the world that we are beginning to create, the world that we continue. When you look past and you see the world that Christians have created, it's a good world. It's some good stuff. We live in a good world, but that's just the beginning. We aren't to look to the past, we're to look to the future and all that God has done, and yes, yet to do in your own life. As we come to God at this morning, it's a call to remember how important your life is. And that when creation was made, he already knew your name. He knew your place, and he had a spot for you. And what God is telling you and what he's telling me, it's all the same thing. He says, I'm watching out for you. I've got your back, and I've got a place for you in the future. I have plans for you. I have plans for you. I have a purpose for your life. You can trust me. And that's what God is saying to each one of you. Maybe you're here today saying, you know, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not in that. I don't belong to that. I don't have that. Well, there's a reason you're here today. It's how God has brought you here. It's why God has brought you here, what he put in your heart to even come here today, that he would give you the desire to be here. And maybe it's a very strange place, but God has called you and put you in this place for a purpose for your life. And he wants to connect with you, and he wants to fill your life with that new life. He wants you not to be dependent on the past, but to be drawn into the future that he has for you. He wants your life to be filled with his peace, with his justice. And he wants your life to be filled with his goodness and his blessings that he has promised for us. He is the true Messiah. When any of us look around in our political world and we see people pretending to be the Messiah, we say, nope, 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 nope. King Jesus is my Messiah. I'm waiting for his election. I'm waiting for his return. I'm waiting for his reign. That's when this world will be right. And I'm going to be a citizen in that kingdom. I'm going to be ready for it. If it happens today, if it happens 1,000 years, I'm a part of that. That's where God has me. And that's what our prayer is. I'd like to pray with you. If you're somebody today and saying, I don't know that I belong in this world. I don't know if I belong in the God's family. Let me just pray with you. And it's a very simple prayer. What we do is we thank God for making a way for us to be a part of his family by what he did on the cross. He died for our sins. And then we give him our lives by saying, I'm not going to live the way I used to live, following my own directions. I'm not going to change, and I'm going to follow Jesus now. The very best of the ability that he gives me, and as he shows me things, I'm going to follow in his way. That's it. That's it. Accepting the presence of Jesus in your life, accepting the presence of Jesus in your heart, letting him become the priority of your life. That changes everything. It changes everything in your life here for the good, but it also changes your eternity from hell to heaven. It changes your destination, and that's what God does. And if God has put it on your heart, and he puts that invitation for you to pray this, pray it along with me, and God will come into your heart, and your life will be changed. Your eternity will be changed.